I've interviewed thousands of people, from serial killers to ministers. Welcome to the interview room. Welcome everybody to the interview room on this special Sunday evening, 1 hour early edition. And as you can tell, I'm not used to being here in an hour because I hit the wrong button as we started. But we've got it all taken care of. Tonight, I want to welcome and thank all of our subs, our members, and of course, all of those who support us. A big thank you to our mods. Without you, we can't do any of this. Especially here on YouTube, Miss Sophia, Teresa M, Maui Girl, and Mimi J2. We certainly love you guys, and we're so grateful for your dedication in helping us and helping this channel to grow. Well, tonight, as you can tell, we have a very special program for you. We have the leading expert on serial killers, Dr. Katherine Ramsland. She is the foremost authority in the world about BTK, Mr. Dennis Rader. We also have in the upper right-hand corner, as you can tell, our friend, Dr. Gary Brucato, a forensic psychologist who is just an amazing human. I'm going to read bios here in a second, but you guys all know Dr. Brucato. And of course, my dear friend and mentor, FBI criminal profiling unit chief, Greg Cooper, who is also the executive director of the Cold Case Foundation. So first, let me introduce Dr. Katherine Ramsland. And let me tell you, that she is author of 71 books, How to Catch the Killer, Psychology of Death Investigations, and Confessions of a Serial Killer, The Untold Story of Dennis Rader, the BTK Killer. Dr. Ramsland teaches forensic psychology at DeSales University in Pennsylvania, and she created the school's forensic track in the psychology program and helped create the online Masters of Arts degree in criminal justice. She is also a writer of a regular blog on Psychology Today, the online magazine, and she is the foremost authority again on BTK. She has written so many books, I can't name them all, but her links to all of those books will be down below. And of course, the short bio for Dr. Brucato, Gary Brucato, is a visiting scholar at Boston College where he collaborated with Dr. Ann Burgess and Victor Petrayko on forensic research. They have examined crimes such as murder, including serial killing, sex offenses, mutilation, dismemberment, and of course, the insanity defense. He's currently serving as a consultant on a grant-funded project by Burgess and Petrayko analyzing murders involving asphyxiation and strangulation and other means. He studies, among other things, how violent thoughts and actions emerge in psychotic versus non-psychotic persons. He is also the co-author of Columbia University's Mass Murder Database, which is the largest mass murder database in the world. He's also the co-author of The New Evil, Understanding the Emergence of Modern Violent Crime. And we also have his links below in the description. And both Dr. Ramsland and both Dr. Brucato will be appearing next week at CrimeCon in Orlando. So if you want to see the extensive bio on both of our guests here tonight, please get over to those bios over there at CrimeCon. Click on their picture and you're going to really see who's in front of you this evening, folks. And of course, finally, my dear friend and mentor, Mr. Greg Cooper. Greg was the FBI's Behavior Analysis Unit Chief. And you've heard me talk about Greg for many, many years, well over 20 years. And Greg, he's one of the leading FBI profilers in the world. And while at the FBI BAU, he worked alongside John Douglas. You can't get any bigger than Greg and John. In fact, Greg took over the unit after John left for a little bit. He was also an instructor at the FBI National Academy on criminal psychology, criminal investigative analysis, and analytical aspects of criminal behavior. He's co-authored the Crime Classification Manual, a landmark book on homicide, arson, and sexual assault, and it's taught worldwide even today to law enforcement. He's also the founder and executive director of the Cold Case Foundation, which I have been a member for quite some time. And the foundation is the country's leading resource for investigating a cold case. And we currently are working active homicide cases around the world, not only internationally, but nationally. We have 130 professionals on the foundation who are tops in their field, which include forensic psychology, homicide investigation, DNA analysis, only to name a few of the expertises. Greg's latest book, Predators, Who They Are and How to Stop Them, is available also on Amazon, and we have his link below to his books. So without further ado, tonight, our conversation is going to focus on convicted serial killer Dennis Rader, known as the BTK killer. We could have thought of no other expert in the world other than Dr. Ramsland, and to invite her on to give us some insight into Mr. Dennis Rader, who is currently serving 10 life sentences in prison for killing 10 people from 1974 to 1991 in the Wichita, Kansas area. He named himself BTK, which stands for Bind, Torture, Kill. And this is what he would do to his victims. He would taunt authorities for years after his killings. And in 2004, Rader sent local media and police letters filled with items related to his crimes, like pictures, word puzzles, and other items of interest that Dr. Ramsland is going to be able to help us get into his mind. So with that, I want to just point out that death investigation constitutes a heavy responsibility, and no person's system or circumstance should deter you from the truth and your personal commitment to see that justice is done, not only for the deceased, but for the surviving families as well. That's why our motto as a murder cop, we work for God. And that came from Lieutenant Commander Vernon J. Gervin, the author of this book over my shoulder. And of course, I put up a couple of pictures of some of the murder cops that we have trained over the years. You'll see Greg in a couple of these. He looks a lot younger than he does tonight, but he's an amazing man. Okay, amazing panel. Dr. Ramsland, thank you so much for being here this evening. We are so grateful. And of course, Dr. Brucato and Greg. So I just want to set the stage, and then we can go into some of the discussion in relationship to Dennis and where you would like to start, Dr. Ramsland. So I just want to point out a couple of bullet points of why we're doing this. So authorities in multiple states had been considering the possibility of BTK being connected to additional cases. Tonight, we find that very interesting, and that we want to explore that supposition. BTK appeared to have had patches of time that cannot be accounted for, so it's worth discussing with this great panel of experts what those potentials could be. The interesting thing is Cold Case Foundation had been studying Dennis Rader without knowing who he was for about 10 years before his capture, with the purpose of training law enforcement investigators around the United States so that they could understand the unique signature connected to the type of crimes that the country was seeing. And so tonight, this is the reason why we have assembled this panel of experts. And of course, Greg being the executive director of Cold Case Foundation and working at the BAU for as long as he did, we thought maybe we would take it on with Dr. Ramsland, Dr. Brucato, and Greg. And these are their books as a whole. So that said, it's a long intro, but I think it's important for us to lay the foundation of what is important here this evening. So, Dr. Ramsland, what can you share with us in relationship to where we should take this train this evening?
Well, I've spoken with the Missouri investigators. I've spoken with the Osage County investigators. I know the DA that was going after Rader, and she shared her files with me. I've seen a lot of the law enforcement stuff. My sense of where we are today with the potential new cases attached to Rader is that we have an impasse. We have people making claims about ambiguous items of interest that can be interpreted in more than one way. I know Dennis Rader has his interpretation, and the sheriff of Osage County has his interpretation. And I side with the DA. Let's see evidence. That the only way to break an impasse where these items do have multiple interpretations is get the evidence, get the items tested to see if they actually are evidence, instead of calling them evidence before you've tested them.
Okay, so let's talk for probably the biggest case that they're trying to connect is the Cynthia Kinney case in Oklahoma, the 16-year-old cheerleader. She worked at her uncle's laundromat in Oklahoma. She was last seen at the laundromat. Her purse and drink were found there along with a half-eaten donut. Okay. From an investigative aspect, me looking through the window, and Greg chime in here, the homicide number 101 is you always look for the last place the victim was seen and the last person to have seen them. And then you can engineer that case through a victimology back into the life of that potential victim. And so one of the things that I am intrigued with is the faded beige 1965 Plymouth with two people inside that pulled up, and Cynthia was seen getting into that car. Have you had any conversation with Dennis about that? And is there any type of vehicle like that in his circle of influence?
I guess there could be vehicles that might have some similarity, but he did not actually work with other people. So she was seen with two people. Some reports say two women, some reports say a man and woman, but he didn't operate with another person at all. And he just now told me he hasn't, if he ever had been through that town, it was not during that time, and it was in passing. Wasn't really, he didn't notice really anything. He didn't stop there. He didn't stay there. So that's what he has to say about it.
So you had a conversation with him today?
I did. I've had a number of conversations with him about these things, because each time a piece of the puzzle, let's say, is put on display in the media, I go to Rader, because I want to know. I mean, some of the things are in the book. For example, there is a small piece that keeps getting shown about 17th Street and a laundromat, and his eyes on the brunette, and bad wash day. So bad wash day could be bad wash day for the victim. It could be bad wash day for him because he didn't succeed. Could be either one. I know that he lived on 17th Street in Wichita for a time in the 1960s. He claims That's the laundromat he's talking about. So there we have another explanation for an ambiguous thing that he wrote. Who's to say? I mean, who's to say he's wrong? I know it's in the book. It's been in the book since when I wrote it in there in 2014. He lived on 17th Street. That's right there. What can I say? He said he doesn't even know this town, and I know that there's some connection. He loves threes and triangles and whatnot. So there is a triangular building nearby. I asked him, have you ever seen that building? He said, no, I've never seen it. So the idea that it had inspired this potential kidnapping, that to me loses some traction.
Okay, interesting. Dr. Brucato, any thoughts on that?
Well, the whole thing is puzzling to me because first and foremost, I'm confused if too much is being made out of a reference to projects in the writing. There are 200 projects that are written about in this here. And I wonder if Katherine could tell us a little bit about if it's safe to assume, as I think is being assumed in the media, that the word project necessarily refers to an abduction or a killing.
It does not.
What does it mean? Oh.
He sent me a list of 55 projects that he considered serious attempts at criminal behavior. The majority of them were breaking and entering, putting surveillance on somebody so he'd name a project, like Project, Cookie was one. And 10 of those 55 were actual murders. And he marks those out on his list. But project really for him was he's kind of entertaining the possibility of following someone. And then if he decides to pick someone out, that becomes more serious. He might follow them. He might learn their routine. And then he might find out they have a dog and he doesn't want to go that way, or there are too many people in the home, or it's just not feasible. He doesn't have the right time period, etc. So a project is simply, this is a potential. I'm going to look into this, and then only 55 of those, according to what he gave to me, turned into things that he actively stalked on a regular basis and really targeted for some kind of criminal activity.
Interesting. Greg, what are your thoughts?
That's very useful. That's very helpful. Mm-hmm. Yeah, great.
Yeah, I think I like the way Sherlock Holmes probably approached looking at cases, and how difficult sometimes it is for us to not to put blinders on, because we develop a theory. When I say Sherlock Holmes, it's Arthur Conan Doyle, of course, who's the author, and who was also a medical physician. And what he emphasized in The Scandal in Bohemia is how important it is that we don't try to make our theories fit the facts, but rather the facts suit the theories. And there's a lot of theories that are going on out there. And by looking at one or two coincidences, I think we've got to be very careful not to make assumptions or presumptions as a result of those coincidences. As you know, Chris, when we look at crimes in Dr. Brucato, in the foundation, we look at it through an investigative model that we refer to as the 10 filters of profiling. We don't look at one or two things, and we recognize that each of these filters are interdependent in the analysis and assessment of a case, particularly when you're trying to link cases together. Victimology is one, the initial contact site is another, the crime scene itself, a disposal site is another filter, physical injuries is another. We also look at sexual assault, whether or not there was sexual assault, what that entailed. We look at MO versus signature. We also look at the organized versus disorganized aspect of a crime scene. and the behavior in which the offender commits his crime. We look at suspect information, and we look at suspect risk level. So when attempting to link cases together, we go through every one of these filters, if you will, see what the similarities are, if there is in fact any similarities, and then we look at the geography, where those crimes are being committed, and the time frame, or the temporal aspects of the crime. Now, that's not to suggest that we don't look at intuition, because as experts, we all have a sense of intuition that's developed over a period of time based upon the combination and totality of experience and training that we've had and education that we've had, as well as bringing together a group of experts, not one or two, but a group of experts from various fields to look at a case. And I think here we don't even have a skeleton to look at in terms of the details of the kinds of behavior that may have been engaged in, to compare to what we know about Mr. Rader and the other crimes that we know that he has committed based upon his confessions. The MO is different. We don't have any MO or signature as it relates to his behavior with the victim in this case, other than his approach. Most of his approaches were in residences, and as Katherine pointed out, he worked alone. He didn't work with anybody. Another thing is it's important, I think, to emphasize he wanted to take the credit when this was all over. He wanted to take the credit for everything that he confessed to, and he's got nothing to hide at this point based upon what he's done previously, not to disclose it now. Why change now midstream and withhold information that if he's not going to be held necessarily accountable for it, but take responsibility for it? And I think that's the offer that's out there.
Which leads me into, and I think, Gary, we're getting a little feedback from your computer. That's okay. I just keep muting it out here. So that leads me into the thought process about Dr. Ramsland. If you can give us some insight into how he really thinks and about his signature aspect of his particular crimes. Educate us on where he is even today. I mean, you just got off the phone with him. You said today. Obviously people are saying he's playing the system still. He's playing law enforcement, but really him better than anybody. For 15 years, you talk to him regularly and visit him, and you've written the books about him. So help us understand that signature aspect and why that is so vital as folks look into these, additional circumstances that have presented themselves.
Well, Greg raises one good point that I keep raising with reporters who call me. Why wouldn't he confess to more? And he has himself said this to every single investigator who has come to see him. He has no consequences to put it out there. He's 78. He's not well. He knows that he could go out in a big splash of glory in his mind if he were to add to his total. He knows that. And he keeps saying, so why wouldn't I do that? And he says he will not confess to something he did not do. You might say, and some have, well, he's a serial killer, so he's a liar. Well, he's not a liar because much of what he told me corresponds with the facts. And I had the DA's collection of items. I also had a number of other things. I had the interrogation tapes, etc. So he doesn't always lie. Maybe he manipulates, maybe he fabricates here and there. But his question is well placed. Why wouldn't I confess? When he was arrested, they thought he was definitely good for 7. He added 3 at the time. And
interesting.
And why? And in detail, and in the book, lots of detail. And all 10 of his crimes were heavily detailed in his notes. So these are the kinds of things you would look at with behavior. I know that there is one theory that he had one MO for Wichita and another MO for everything outside Wichita, which is an explanation of convenience. It's a really odd thing to say about a sexually compelled predator, because typically they're going to have that core sense of a ritual that they want to fulfill. And with him, it was bondage. And the way he approached people was the stalking and the voyeurism, and all of that was part of it. So why would he change his MO just because he's outside Wichita? I can't make any sense of that.
Yeah, and it's interesting, and let's talk about signature a little bit. Let me see. I'm trying to unmute Gary. I think you're muted, Gary. Let's talk a little bit about signature and why that's so critical. Because law enforcement, remember, I coined it the Lucas effect, and Cold Case Foundation. If you've watched the Confession Killers, we're on episode number 5. You'll see that guy right over there sitting at the table talking about Lucas. But it's almost as if law enforcement wants to hear and see, as much as they can, but that could be very dangerous simultaneously. So let's talk about signature and why that is so critical, Dr. Brucato.
Well, it's important to distinguish one's modus operandi from signature elements of a crime. The modus operandi are the things that are done practically to commit a crime, and the signature elements are things that are required for the psychosexual gratification of the offender, and are therefore going to be touches that are present throughout the crimes, because without them, the excitement and the titillation would be reduced. They're very important for the linkage between cases. And this could be things, for example, like the particular way in which a victim is bound, which is a point that I think we're going to get into about what's wrong in the Garber case, because the way that victim was bound does not match the very particular way in which the other established BTK victims were bound, or even the people in his drawings are bound, because it seems to represent such a signature element for him. I just wanted to add to what Katherine said there, that I'm not sure, because I don't have personal interaction with Rader, and I love Katherine's observations on this, but my sense is that he sees himself as something of an artist with an oeuvre, an output, that it would almost bother him to have cases attributed to him that were not his, that he had no control over, that did not meet his signature elements, and that it might feel to him almost irksome that somebody would be attributing work to him, to his history that isn't his. Does that match your sense of things?
It does match my sense of things. Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily about that he has integrity. I think it's more that he has a sense of the artist. Yeah, this is my work. That's not my work. Why would I even do that? Especially, in fact, when he saw the pictures of Garber, he said, "Wow, that's overkill." That was his comment. And he thought he said, "It's interesting that some of those things are the kinds of ties I would use, but others aren't." And like, he didn't use coaxial cables. There were things that he didn't use unless he found them in someone's home. Also, in my sense of him, he had big fantasies about doing things inside barns. She was dumped outside an abandoned farmstead. I think she would have been inside, because that's where he was trying to take his final victim, but he got lost in the fog. That's where she would have been found if it were his victim.
That's very interesting. And also, getting back to the Kinney case, something that bothers me about it as a possible BTK case is, my sense is that after the children in the Otero case, everyone was an adult. And it's been said that this might be because his son was born, and then afterward he didn't target children anymore. But Kinney is a minor. And I think it would be very strange because if you look at the trajectory, it would suggest going backward into targeting a minor and then returning to adults. And I wonder what your thoughts might be on that, Catherine, about why he might have stopped targeting minors and how what it might say that he never returned to them.
Well, the Otero was a mother-daughter. He had a fantasy of a mother-daughter. It wasn't specifically about a minor. And that was very arousing to him. When he killed Shirley Vian, who was not an intended victim, he never followed her, stalked her, clocked her routines, anything. It was simply that the person he had targeted was not home, and she lived nearby, and he followed her son into to the house. And there were 3 kids in there, and he did think about killing them, but he knew that she was expecting, I think, a call or something. He was going to get interrupted, but he did actually think about doing that with them. So not targeting kids, but also not really hesitating about that either. And many of his drawings, his sexual drawings, were of very young girls, bound, stabbed, gagged, sexual activity done to them. So I do think he still had that kind of sense of targeting kids, but he didn't actually, none of the victims were young kids that all by themselves. But he did try to abduct a bank clerk before he killed the Oteros. There was an incident where he had targeted a young woman, and he tried to abduct her in a parking lot. Didn't go well. She got away. So that kind of gives some credence to the Kinney case a little bit, because that was in the 1970s as well. But what he says is that he didn't try that again because he failed at it and was really afraid he was going to get caught.
And with Garber, there was a direct sexual assault, correct? Which, as I understand, is not typical of Rader, to actually have physically sexually assaulted a victim.
We don't know that. From my understanding of the Missouri investigators, they don't know for sure she was sexually assaulted. You're talking about Garber. That has been said in the media a lot. And Lori Howard said, we don't know. She was too decomposed to know that. She said, I kind of thought maybe because of the way her clothing was, but that could have, she lay out there for a while. We really can't know what happened to her. So that doesn't really eliminate her just because, we don't know.
Well, that's a very important distinction. That's the first time I'm hearing anybody say that, and that's extremely important.
I asked her directly. She told me, yes, we don't know, and I don't know why that's being said.
And Dennis, Greg, what are your thoughts?
My understanding is on the Vian's kids that he did intend to kill them.
Yeah.
And the only thing that stopped him, as he said, his words written, was a phone call saved them.
Yeah.
And then he followed up with suggesting how he was going to do that. He was going to do it the same way in which he had done the Otero young boy and father.
Right.
And it's interesting. Go ahead, Craig.
No,
Greg.
Go ahead.
No, finish your thought.
Just to say that it's certainly possible for them to stray outside their normal routine, meaning serial killers. But typically when that happens, it's circumstances that change that routine. If things are going as well and along as planned as intended, they're going to follow through with that same typical signature aspect, which that would have been the way in which they were killed as signature, not MO, because the way in which, for example, he's into ligature strangulation and bondage and suffocation, which exceeds that which is necessary to successfully kill somebody. It's the way in which he's doing it that gives him the gratification. And as had happened with the Vian's kids, the only reason they didn't experience that is because that phone call. And why the phone call? Because he expected that if nobody answered it, somebody might be piqued as to, there's a problem, I better go check maybe. And he would have been interrupted anyway, and that's what interrupted him.
Right.
So most likely would have completed his follows. Yeah.
Which brings a thought Dr. Ramsland, is the fact that he makes a comment of overkill. That can you go a little bit deeper into that for us? Help us understand that.
Yeah, that was sort of what you might think of as a spontaneous utterance. He was surprised at somebody wrapping. I think it was wrapped around her legs. He was surprised at somebody feeling the need to wrap her so many times with so many different items, cord and coaxial cable, and I guess pantyhose or whatever it was that was around her. And he didn't really understand why would somebody need to do that. So his reaction suggests this isn't the way he operated or would operate. And it wasn't. He typically would bind victims with their hands around their back, strangle them with these items, bind them to it like Shirley Vian bound to a bed. When he killed Maureen Hedge, took her out of the house and posed her in various ways, but not with bindings of that nature. So when you look at the Garber case compared to all the various things he did to his victims, there's really not a lot that's similar. He mentioned with some of those cords or things I would have used, but not all of those.
Mm-hmm. And his murder kit, what did that? He left that murder kit on one of his victims' house on the side of the bed. Didn't he get spooked, and then he fled out of there, if I remember correctly?
I'm not sure what you mean.
In one of his drawings, he had his murder, his devices.
I think you mean
in a bag.
The Nancy Fox drawing, maybe? Are you talking about that one?
Well, that was one of them, and wasn't there a failed attempt that?
The Anna. Anna.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
No, he didn't get spooked. He ran out of time. She didn't come back when she was supposed to, and he ran out of time, so he had to leave. And there were no drawings from that because she didn't come home. But she left her home directly after she found out he had been in it.
Okay. So let's talk about then the drawings as a whole. Help us understand why that's significant to him and towards his signature as a whole, or his MO.
Well, he had been drawing since he was a teenager, drawing these girl traps and, girls in all different kinds of positions, and imagining them tied to railroad tracks and trains running over them. I mean, he did a very elaborate one for me of a silo with multiple torture objects all over the place, and including a train and a train track inside the silo, because the train was a really big deal to him to imagine, like a Dudley Do-Right scene where the train actually goes and kills Nell. And these were dreams that he had, fantasies that he had. If he'd hear a train whistle, he'd think about a girl on the track tied there. So he had a lot of drawings like that. He had a lot of drawings of young girls bound, blood coming out of them, stabbed, strangled, hanged. And then he also cut out pictures from magazines and newspapers and draw things on them, gags and ropes and whatnot, because for him, binding was the most arousing thing. That he said that it's the binding that matters in all of this. That has to be part of it.
Go ahead,
from my perspective, in terms of the drawings, all that represents practice, curiosity, imagination, fantasy, in anticipation and preparation to take it to the next level. First, it all starts in the mind. When he commits it to paper, it's more detailed. He can experience a higher level of projecting himself into that situation. And then it elevates his ability to strengthen his level of confidence to now go out and eventually commit those crimes. And that's why you see those similarities between, as Dr. Ramsland has suggested, the details of those those drawings, and then you take a look at the crime scenes, they just reflect that fantasy and what he's committed to paper.
They do. I agree. He needed power over females because they made him feel off balance in a way that humiliated him.
Did he ever explain to you, Dr. Ramsland, what his issues were and are with females, particularly young females?
Going to school, he was a terrible student. He felt awkward, but he was the oldest boy of 4 and had always felt kind of empowered by that. And he gets to school and suddenly he's completely, female teachers make him feel stupid. Girls don't respond to him. He doesn't really know how to act around them. And all of a sudden this juvenile sense of, I'm important gets deflated entirely. And nobody's fault. It's his perception. Mm-hmm. It's his sense of, what am I supposed to do with this? The only thing I know to do with this is to keep control over them, total control. And part of it came from a teacher. Part of it was from his mother, humiliating him in several instances. And part of it was from a teacher who he would spy on. And I think he had his first masturbation experience watching her while he had a rope around his middle. And that was arousing because he felt like he had power over her by being able to see her, and she didn't know he was out there. And that transferred when he began to break into things. Like he broke into the school and he broke into houses, and he felt powerful over people when he did that, because they didn't want, they didn't invite him in, but he was able to get in. And the more he could do that, especially as became a person who puts in security systems, it just gave him the confidence that females otherwise took away from him.
Interesting.
So, question. Go ahead.
I was going to ask what led him then to, in terms of ultimate power and control, that would include the power over life or death.
Yes.
Yeah. Interesting also with respect to the lack of sexual assault, as far as we know with his female victims, but we know that it was sexually motivated. Where was the issue with respect to his inability, either by preference or inability, to perform sexually, or to have to masturbate?
Well, he likes to say it's so that he's not violating his marriage vows, so, which I think is amusing. And I actually caught him out kind of in a lie with that, because there was a customer once that he tried to seduce and wanted to have an affair with. And I said, well, isn't that sort of a violation of your marriage vows? I mean, so that doesn't really make sense if that's your reasoning why you did not sexually violate your victims. So I think when he was with his victims and had them bound, the sexual experience for him wasn't about inserting himself. It was about having power over them. Yeah. And so masturbating next to them using a nightgown or something like that was just as fine as raping them. And I think he does believe the fact that he did not rape anyone that we know of gives him some sort of special status in the murder world.
So, question, help us understand the psychological development up to his first kill. What was that trigger that pushed him over the edge and the Otero family were in the mark?
So he will say it was getting fired from a job he really loved at Cessna. And all of a sudden his wife is the breadwinner, which made him feel awful. And that was when he decided to start taking classes. He broke into homes. That gave him a sense of power. And then he decided to go for it. He had already had a lot of fantasies about following women. He'd already tried to abduct the bank clerk. I have a feeling that he had tried some things when he was overseas in the military that he hasn't actually admitted to, but he was carrying a hit kit there. So I think the fantasies already had spilled over into some form of reality there that he hasn't yet talked about. And so I think it was really anger, feeling helpless and powerless, and he just had enough of a rehearsal fantasy going on that it was time. It was time, and then he saw the mother-daughter, the mother and Josephine Otero, Julie and Josephine, and they just were at the wrong place at the wrong time. And they also
So-
lived in a house that he thought was a perfect placement. It was a corner house, had 3 in the address because 3s are a big deal to him. It was easy getaway kind of thing. So suddenly it became a real place, real people. He could. There was a fence around the backyard. He did not know they had a dog. I don't know why, because it was January and there were dog marks all over the snow, but he didn't know that. He likes to think of himself as somebody who left nothing to chance, but he left a lot of things to chance, in fact. So he's pretty limited in his actual self-awareness, I think.
Interesting. So when his first abduction attempt, do you believe that the bank teller was the first abduction attempt, or do you think, based on your comments, that his military development, there could be some others that we don't know about in the front side of this?
At least in terms of stalking and his first sexual experiences with women there, actually overseas. In terms of stalking, I think he did that. Why would you put together a hit kit if you're not, carry it around? He was in a place where there probably wouldn't be much accountability. These are people who didn't really know him, so I think that certainly there are victims of something there. Whether they're murder victims, I don't know, but I do think he did some things there.
Do you think it's possible that he was introduced to the bondage with those first sexual experiences while he was in the military?
No, the bondage came from being a kid, actually, and playing with ropes and stuff when he was on the farm and feeling the pleasurable experience of ropes. He would tie them around his waist and almost pass, and he would pass out from just lack of oxygen, but it was highly pleasurable to him. And also, one time he was bound with ropes playing cowboys and Indians and trapped in a silo, and that while terrifying was also very arousing. So all of the fantasies of bondage really came from his early development.
Oh, okay. Now that's really interesting. I'm sorry.
It's interesting because I had talked. We mentioned Vernon Gayberth earlier, who I think may have been consulted on BTK when he was unknown, and I had said to him that I was very interested in learning how sexually sadistic people over the centuries would have developed their fantasies prior to the wide availability of pornography on the internet, printed photography that you could be private with, like snapshots with a Polaroid or whatever. And what he had said at the time was that he thought they might have been doing a lot of drawing or maybe even model making or something, but there must have been some way that they played out visually these fantasies. And I wonder how much Rader talks about using drawings as a way of developing those fantasies and the rehearsal way that was talked about. And the other thing that I wonder about, because there's an assumption going on, I think, and we see it all over the media right now, that the people depicted in the drawings must be real victims, that there's a correspondence to real and I can't help but wonder, based on other artwork of serial killers that I've seen, if they aren't simply fantasy people that aren't actually human beings out in the world. So I wonder what your thoughts are on that. I haven't heard anybody opine one way or the other on it.
Well, I'll tell you a funny story about Vern Eberth. He told me once that Dennis Rader had one of my books in his collection. He yelled it across the room at me in front of a lot of people. And it turned out during the sentencing hearing, in fact, he had one of my books. And I didn't get a royalty because he stole my book. So, but it was a book about forensic psychology for writers. So I certainly didn't teach him much of anything. And I thought that was amusing that Vern noticed my book among the stash of things that have been collected from his house. I think it really depends, Gary, your question. I think it depends on the killer, because I think we believe Gerard Schaefer's drawings do depict quite a few of his victims that we haven't been able to link to him. And I think that goes without saying. When you look at some of those drawings, that probably some of that was real. I think with Rader, he certainly drew some of his actual victims, but he has so many drawings prior to the murders and during the murders that really aren't about anyone. And I think it is really odd to kind of watch how people are kind of sorting through his drawings and going, "Oh, this looks like that missing person," but it's a drawing. How are you going to be able to really make the case for that unless the drawing is wearing something really unique that person had on when they went missing? I think some of that is getting a little bit just going too far. And you guys can talk to that because you're the investigators, but I've been a little surprised by some of that.
And point is being made that there's something special about the color drawings. But I have several drawings that were done by Rader, and they're all in color.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I heard someone say that, for example, it's possible that the color drawings suggest more emotion, and therefore they may be real victim. I think that's just his style when he draws, and some of them are in color, and some are. I don't know if I would ascribe meaning to them being in color.
All of his
Uh,
letters have drawings to me in color. He likes color, and many of the drawings are in color. Lots of them with red blood too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's not uncommon for sexual sadistic personalities, right? I mean, I've seen many cases where the fantasy drawings, are played out, and then of course, the crime occurs itself. But so it's not unique to Dennis Rader that he's making these drawings. I mean, there was a
Well,
guy I think in New Mexico that was doing it. Go ahead, Greg.
I was going to say, I agree. It makes it more real, doesn't it? In color, in living color, so
Yeah.
to speak. So you add color to it. It makes
He
it
put names
him
on
more
them.
real.
He would take them for rides in his truck. They got to go on an outing with him when he went to work. Monique and Andrea, and they were real to him.
Yeah.
So he was living this dual fantasy secret life, and yet what's the significance of the number 3? Why is that so important to him?
It's magic. He just seemed to notice a pattern in his life of threes coming up. Like he had, 2 childhood friends, so that was 3. He had, I guess, 3 girlfriends. He had many of the victims' addresses have 3 or multiples of 3. He had a very long, elaborate page full of the number 3 and how it figures into his life. And he just found that to be significant. Like, it's a pattern. He sees it as a pattern that is somehow protective for him.
Interesting. How did he project his girlfriends? Oh, I'm sorry, Dr.
Oh, I'm sorry, Chris. I was just going to say, in one of the things that I have from Rader, there's a sort of a seal that he created, and it looks like the number 3 is turned on its side to look like breasts.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's how that figures into things, but I'm sure, Catherine, you're familiar with this
Oh, yeah.
drawing that he does with the three turns on the side and he
Yeah.
adds what appear to be nipples, and I think that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, interesting. What has he commented about his three girlfriends?
Yeah. One left him, and it was a terrible, terrible adolescent boy experience to have his girlfriend leave him. I thought one of the most interesting ones was he was out with a girl he had a crush on the night of the Clutter murders, and that's Kansas. So it was about to the west, and it came over the radio, and they were bound with ropes.
Oh,
And
wow.
he wanted to immediately bind the girl he was in the car with and kill her.
Hmm.
And it was,
Wow, help
15.
us understand that.
Fascinating.
What type of what we would call precipitating stressors and triggering events may occur before he would go out and act out or commit one of these crimes?
Well, with the Oteros, it was that anger and feeling of helplessness. But with Catherine Bright, about 3 months later, it was really the sense of, I want to do this again. I got away with it, and that made me feel great, and I want to do it again. But this time I'm going to control it better. So it was more of I want to prove this to myself. And then things went wrong because Kevin Bright was also there. And so once again, mistakes were made, and he almost got shot by his own gun in that particular situation. So time went by before he tried it again. So that was 1974, and it was in 77 when he tried again.
Mm-hmm.
And the intended victim wasn't home, so he ended up with Shirley Vian.
Mm-hmm.
So he just kept making these blunders and errors and things not going according to the fantasy. It was only when he killed Nancy Fox that he felt as if he finally had control of a victim. It was his type of victim. He got to do what he wanted with her. And so she number 7 number 7 by this time. And that was the first time he felt as if I finally did this. And with her, it was a matter of where she lived. And I was in that house. It is tiny. It's a duplex. Tiny. If somebody else is in there with you, you are trapped. And so because he saw her, I think she's at the mailbox or something of that nature. She was the right size because he wanted a woman he could, clearly overpower. She was petite, the kind of woman he wanted. He had all the right things going for him, and he got into her house and waited for her and was able to do what he wanted. So and then again, time goes by and he doesn't strike again. So the various triggers, I think, really had a lot to do with the circumstances of his life. It wasn't like, you hear about healthcare serial killers, like let's say Charles Cullen, who whenever something was really going wrong, he'd look around for a victim, and that would make him feel better. It wasn't like that with Rader. It really had a lot to do with circumstances. Then the desire for fame. It would bug him to see Ted Bundy in the news and other serial killers, and he wasn't getting his due. So sometimes it was simply about, I have the time and I want to, shake things up again. So that was part of it.
Yeah, so if we were to dovetail his personality into today, I mean, in your call even, a couple hours ago, he's got to be really beside himself that all this other stuff is coming up, and he's going, hey, and correct, keep me on the right track here, and keep me honest. Why wouldn't he have stepped up and said, look, okay, yeah, those are mine, and by the way, this is how I did them. I mean, do you sense that he would not have done that?
I don't see why he wouldn't take responsibility. And it's not even responsibility, make the claim. I don't know why and he says it himself. Why wouldn't I accept this?
Right. Well, and
I'm just not going to.
And it was such a strong emotion for him that ultimately it leads to his capture.
Yeah.
That same issue. I've got a question for you, Dr. Ramsland. You mentioned, and like Chris says, keep me honest if I remember correctly. I think you mentioned when he was involved with rope, became kind of obsessive about it, had some sexual experiences with it. And you mentioned the terminology terrorizing. It was also terrorizing. It may have been the atmosphere that he was in at the time that he was participating in it, but that he experienced that. And typically, and there's no doubt, at least in my mind, that he is a sexual sadist, and that he received a great amount of satisfaction watching his victims suffer. And particularly in one that I'm thinking of, the young girl in the first case, the Otero case, where she is looking at him and he's responding to the way she's looking at him and speaking to him. And the level of satisfaction that he received from that. Do you think that experience of the coupling of the terrorizing experience, the sexual experience, when he's young, projects all the way forward to him getting involved in these sexually sadistic activities with his victims? Where does the sadism come from otherwise?
I think the sadism comes from his own masochism. And I know that we find this a lot in people where both of those impulses happen in the same person. He would bury himself, he would wrap himself, he would hang himself, he would do all kinds of things to himself. And it's almost like he wanted to experience being a victim, being under someone's control, when he was doing that for his autoerotic episodes and his motel parties and, whatever he called them. And then he would transfer that to be the person doing this to someone else. But there was always a sense of like he would take things from them and then wear those things in his autoerotic, like slips. He particularly liked women's slips. Trying to almost recreate what the terror they must have felt when he was in the room. There was one suggestion that he had told, I think it was Catherine Bright, the BTK killer. He has denied that, but I think he may well have done that because the psychological torture. I mean, he didn't spend long enough time. All of us here know about the torture people and
Sure.
keeping victims alive to do things over and over to them. He didn't do that. The torture for him was more psychological, of the fear, the sense of power he had over them. He'd see it. He wanted to replicate. So Harvey Glattman was sort of a role model for him. And Glattman was a photographer, or posed as one anyway, taken pictures of these young women after he talked them into letting him bind them. And the look of terror on their face that he captured in his photos imprinted on Dennis when he was 14. He got a hold of one of these magazines, true detective magazines, with those photos as the cover feature. And he wanted to replicate that look because in his mind as a teenager, that's the power over women I want to experience. So each victim would have been subjected to something that would have brought out for him that look. That's what he wanted.
That is fascinating. So from his teenage, at that time in his teenage development, how close is that to the girlfriend incident where he's thinking, I want to bind her?
I don't
The
think
night of the
he
murder.
didn't act on that. It's just something he had in his mind. She did not,
Okay.
or at least he never described to me that he actually said that to her and saw the look on her face. I didn't have that impression. It was just a girl he had a crush on. It wasn't his girlfriend, but
Okay.
he, wanted her to be his girlfriend. It's just that listening to that radio broadcast about what had happened to the Clutters, rather than being oh my God, it was this surge of erotic feeling in him. And oh my God, and I've got this girl right next to me that I could do this with. So these are the kinds of things that, form during, adolescent sexuality. And that became something he wanted to replicate.
That's fascinating, Doc. I mean, you have such an insight into his mind. What uh, I'm sorry, Dr. Brucato, I got to ask one
No,
more
no, no.
question. I'm
Go
absolutely
ahead.
loving. I'm getting an education here, like it's unbelievable. So that from an investigative aspect, my brain is going 1,000 miles an hour. So from that moment, when does his drawing fantasies really start to take off? Do you have insight into that?
During his adolescence, he was drawing some of these things on the board while other kids were going out to recess. He was drawing girl traps and imagining Annette Funicello in the girl trap, and he would watch Dudley Do-Right cartoons and imagine, Nell on the train tracks, and the train would run over her. So these are all things that he was indulging in his adolescence.
It's
Wow.
interesting
And he
that
took that into the military. Go ahead, Greg.
yeah, it's interesting that he fantasizes about their demise rather than rescuing them.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I was just going to ask, it must be interesting being female, interacting with Peter. Has he ever voiced any outrageous kind of perverse ideas or been condescending or anything, or do you seem to represent a kind of idealized female figure who, where he would never harm a hair on your head, kind of a thing? It's interesting to think about why he's able to open up to you so uniquely.
I have the added status of being a professional, because I know that with other women correspondents, other female correspondents, he has gone over the line with them. But never with me. I've confronted him about some things that, I found that he was lying about or, saying odd things about. But we've had a fairly respectful relationship. Even if I have a set schedule when he can call me, and if he has to break it for some reason, he's very apologetic. Whereas I've heard of other people who have these arrangements with serial killers who get calls in the middle of the night and a lot of violation of boundaries. Rader really has never done that with me. And we've known each other a long time at this point. I think he respects me, but also I was his opportunity. This is his shot, right? This is the way to get his story out there, because I wasn't just a psychology professional, I was a writer. And I think that was a very big deal to him. But I will say the irony was this. The first thing he wanted me to do was learn codes and participate in his game. So fine, I'm up for that, because I'm looking for behavior of any kind that he wants to display. So we were going to do this whole project through codes, in part because he didn't want the guards to know what was going on, but also because it's his game. It's his spy game. And in the end, he kept forgetting his code. So I ended up making the code that we used, meaning I had the power. So he doesn't want to be powerless to a female, but in the end, that's exactly how it happened.
And that's fascinating. Early on, I don't think a lot of people know that the FBI had, some psycholinguistics look at some of those codes that were going on, early on in the cases when they were kicking off. I have a question. How, in your assessment, how did he compartmentalize his family life so well? How did he pull that off?
He has a great term for that. And we use compartmentalizing, which is long and awkward. His term is cubing. And I love it because it's easy to spell, but you think of a cube with multiple sides of a cube, and each one is a facet of his identity. And he can turn the side he needs outward under those circumstances, but pivot easily because he's not deeply rooted in any kind of integrity or truth. He's rooted in manipulation. And so he can turn any side he wants, given the circumstances. So he can be a church leader. He can be, a good father in his imagination, a good husband, a serial killer, liar, breaking and entering, whatever it takes. He can turn it outward, and all the other facets of the cube are still part of him, but he's not aware of them because he's now focused on that side. And so that's a little bit different from compartmentalizing, which is more like separate compartments. I think the cube, which integrates all the facets, but uses them, however they're useful, is a much more interesting concept. And he came up with that.
It's almost like
Is that a sense of control for him too?
I think it's just the way, and he talked about doing that as a kid, that he would cube into when they played Cowboys and Indians or, whatever, he'd cube into like an actor. I could be this now. I could be that now. And it's just and actually he spelled it as couping, couping. And I finally worked out, you mean, like a cube, like you're turning and twisting it. So I guess together we came up with the concept, but that was the idea, is he could flip from one face to another easily. So I think that's part of, we think about psychopaths being not deeply rooted in emotion in terms of, caring about truth and all of that. So they can flip from one thing to another depending on their needs, because their needs come first. They're very narcissistic, even to the point of being infantile. They can flip around easily because they don't have that same sense of personal integrity that the rest of us have. And I think if you put that into the cubing concept, you're going to get a very good sense of why they can pivot so easily from one to another and not really have any remorse or caring about what happens.
Interesting. Greg, you were going to say something, and Dr. Brucato?
Well, it just reminds me of kind of a fragmentation of his personality.
Yeah.
And so did he ever share with you that he could feel any sense of regret or remorse?
Yeah. All the time.
When he would jump over into one person, he's at church and now he's thinking about what happened the night before.
No remorse about that.
Okay.
But regret, definitely.
Yeah.
Remorse about hurting his family. It isn't that he doesn't feel, and I know when he was on camera in that hearing that's captured for all to see, he looks like he's just flat and doesn't, but that's not the way he presents normally. That was just a situation. He does care about how he felt, what has happened to his wife. He's hurt by things that have gone on with his daughter. How deeply does that go? I don't know. I don't know how deeply it goes with anybody.
Sure. But he never expressed regret or remorse for any of his victims.
No, because once he has targeted the victims, they belong to him. That's you hear that, I'm sure, from a lot of the others. They belong to them. There isn't really room for remorse about that.
Yeah.
It's interesting, Catherine, because I saw a letter once from Rader where somebody was asking about what he thought happened to him to lead to this behavior, and he claimed that he had a head injury that was at the root of everything. I'm sure you've heard this story from him before.
It depends on what he's recently heard or seen on TV, and suddenly, because he's also a changeling, he's also possessed. He's also, it depends. It depends on who's asking and what they're expecting from him, because he certainly can play many roles.
It's very interesting, and I, being mindful of your time, one thing I want to make sure.
Oh, but he did have it. He did have 2 head injuries, significant ones. Yeah.
At what ages?
When he was an infant, his mother dropped him on his head and did not get medical help. He turned blue. And also when he was maybe 17. He was in a car accident. His head hard on the windshield. Again, no medical assistance for that either. So there were a couple, and his mother, when she was pregnant with him, went horseback riding and fell. So we don't,
Very
maybe something happened. I don't know. We haven't had any MRI scans to know. So
right. And so just, in the interest of your time, I think it'd be important to ask you is, one of the problems that comes up with these cases that are being looked at as potentially linked is that he would have to be in locations that we don't know him to have been at that time. Do you have any reason to believe he would have been traveling to places like Missouri and Oklahoma and all that? Because the time frames don't seem to be matching up. Like working for the census in another state was a few years away from when the potential crime occurred. He wasn't there the whole time. So what are your thoughts on that?
well, both of the cases the two main cases, and actually I do want to hear more about you guys and what you're thinking about all this too. The two main cases are fairly close to that southeast corner of Kansas where he grew up on his two grandfathers, two sets of grandparents had farms. He played a lot there. He went there for fishing trips. So neither of them are a long distance from areas that he's very familiar with. And he did like to drive around. We maybe we can't place him there, but we can't really say he wasn't there either. But that's why I would say something like, well, the sheriff makes a lot about the Triangle building because he thinks, that became a big deal to you. And have you ever seen that building? He said, no, someone told me about it recently. I have not seen it. So you could say he's lying, or you could say he hadn't noticed it and it hadn't been a factor because he's not the guy who abducted Kinney. But I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not saying one way or the other. But I'd love to hear more about what you guys are thinking about all this, really. I've talked too much tonight.
No, you're fascinating, and we thank you so much for your insight. I mean, you can never get enough. But one of the things I think we all have to consider, I mean, from an investigative perspective, to your point, is the fact that you have to go and look at these things very neutrally. You have to look right down the middle of either side. Could he be? Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. And the only way you can do that is when you go to the case file, and Greg and I, we just recently trained, the homicide task force for the first ever assembled Native American group of investigators. I mean, they have 1,500 cold cases that they've been reviewing, and the Cold Case Foundation are the training apparatus for them. That's right. The first thing we teach them is you've got to start where the last person saw the victim, i.e., and in the Kinney case, it's pretty clear. She got into a beige 1965 Plymouth, okay, with people. And then, you engineer that back and you look at the signature, the MO of how Rader operated, to your point earlier, Dr. Ramsland, he did things as a lone wolf. And so his risk level would be much higher to get anybody else involved in what he's doing. It's not like Bianchi, where the two cousins are doing their thing. So for him to have somebody else come into his world while he's potentially dormant is a red flag from an investigative perspective, and that's why I think the DA came out pretty, forthright, saying, look, we can never dismiss anything, but let's give it to the Oklahoma Bureau of Investigation. Let them take a look at it as well. We'll keep our mind open. But then he follows up with a caveat, but we had a suspect, but he's deceased.
Right.
And so those are the kind of things where I think as people look at this, they have to start with investigations 101. And they can't, as Greg mentioned a little bit ago, they can't fit and Greg, I'm speaking too much here, but how many times have we seen investigators go down rabbit holes and they just can't get out once they're there? What's your thought on that?
Well, I think sometimes we, and I'll say we, I mean, I'm included, I think, we get committed to a theory and like a bulldog won't let go of it because we're absolutely convinced that's what happened. And so we get this tendency to try to make those facts, massage it into that theory. And it's a huge mistake. And I learned that years ago. And so we get these blinders on oftentimes. That's why I'm really an advocate of the approach of as many people as we can to take a look at a case, to look at it through various filters, various disciplines, and then get everybody's opinion and try to find commonalities between each other. I think it's like taking a look at a case through several doctors' eyes who have specialties, a medical case, and coming up with the answer. Because now, through this concept of a collusion, if you will, collaboration, that we create a whole new perspective on how to look at something and a new set of glasses to look through because we have so many different backgrounds and experiences to review a case. I think there's the strength in numbers, and when I say that, I'm talking about reaching outside of what we normally reach out of. Oftentimes, law enforcement agencies and investigators have a difficult time reaching outside of law enforcement, and detectives at the same level that they are that may be working it. But as a result of that, we can fail to see it from a whole new perspective that can open us up to resolving a case that otherwise would never be resolved.
Yeah, and I think right now, what we're hearing in the media, as well as we're hearing from the authorities, like KBI, which I just put up a couple of minutes ago, there does not appear to be evidence that is direct evidence or linking him to these other cases. And not all, and right now it's still early, but at the same time, we don't, one of the cautions that we always also speak to law enforcement about, and by the way, I'm full-time an investigator. I can't I work as Greg knows, I work murder every single day. And so one of the things I don't, share with people on YouTube is what I do during the day. Okay. Because one of the other red flags that came to me anyway was the fact that this was being so public that if they had, A, B, C, and D, well, guys and gals, I think we all, know, and I'm talking to our audience here, is you keep that under the hat. And, because if it's not him, you don't want the other guy to know if that individual is still alive, of the progression that you're making there. So the interesting thing right now is the authorities have come out and said, look, we can't see the linkage here. And so what I'm praying is that there is not another Henry Lee Lucas development here. That we, and we all know what happened there. Law enforcement agencies came from all around the United States to a central, depository of information, i.e. Lucas, and all he did was fill in the gaps.
Yeah.
And right, Dr. Ramsland, I mean,
Yes.
and Dr. Brucato, I mean, keep me honest here. So it scares me to see that potential, but at the same time, I have confidence in some of the people that have weighed in, colleagues and professionals who I value their judgments and their opinions. And I guess we'll just wait to see, how it's going to all unfold ultimately. But it looks like some of the cases have already collapsed. But there's always, never say never, right? Dr.
Well,
Brucato?
I have
Kath,
I have a question really for the sheriff. He showed me this knotted nylon that he picked up off of Rader's yard back in May. He's had it since April. Why hasn't it been sent somewhere to test? I don't understand that.
Yeah, I mean, and there are items like that. I guess there was a box where some other potential trophies or tokens were kept. I'm assuming that information and those items are sent to the lab. And in modern technology, they may be able to pull information off of that. So, DNA if possible. But again, we have to also take into consideration, are they connected to the other 10? How are we going to link them?
But that's what Rader
independent?
says. Anything you find is going to be connected to those 10. That is exactly what he says.
Yeah. And so, that leaves this big question mark out here of, hey, but we have this here. Okay. But you have the suspect saying, well, yeah, okay, so you found my stuff,
Right.
Let's talk. He would love, and I'll bet you he would love nothing more than to find out which one they found and then talk to you about it.
He would. He definitely would like to know that. And I know, I mean, there's a letter, they're talking about the 2008 letter. I know who it was to. He did not say he had more victims in that letter.
Okay. And in
Isn't
your
the
book, you
pantyhose-
talk about,
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
go ahead,
Chris.
Doc. And in your book,
I was
Dr. Ramsland, you talk about the 11th victim that the BTK task force was
Took
really
the words out of my
upset.
mouth, Chris.
Okay,
That's what I was gonna
I'm learning from you over here. So, right? I mean, I remember the investigators going, "Hey, wait a minute! This Dr. Ramsland is writing this book. She has this chapter in there about him talking about an 11th victim," and they didn't get it at first. They did eventually because they read your book, but
Well,
it's a
Wichita PD knew about it.
Yeah.
They did. They knew who it was. They just hadn't put it out there for her sake. So that wasn't actually news, but it became news in an odd way. So
yeah.
Isn't
And
that the
that's
victim
to
that he
my point, the
fantasized
whole
about
that.
hanging? That's the suspended victim, the one that he fantasized about dangling.
yeah. And I will just
And-
say, not a week goes by, I don't have someone write to me and tell me they were his intended victim. They saw him do this. He did this to them. He raped them. He abducted them. I have this every week. And in every case, it makes no sense. He wasn't there. He doesn't do it that way. He denies he ever knew you. But they're determined that I am a BTK victim. And that's not just Dennis Rader. There's a whole book of people who claim Bundy abducted them or did things to them, and it couldn't have happened, and yet in their minds. And that's a whole psychology altogether.
Yes. Although he probably gets hybristophilic messages from women, doesn't he?
Oh, sure.
Does he get those?
Yeah.
What's that mean, Gary?
Meaning people who are aroused by the notion of being involved with somebody who has killed or committed violent crime is a sort of a turn on. And there's all sorts of reasons why that seems to happen. But I always wondered if he had gotten that kind of mail.
Oh, sure.
But,
he gets so many letters. Yeah.
I'm sure, but he must eat that up. But one of the things that really disturbs me about these things getting into the media is that once they do, because they can't be disproved, really, you don't have a body sometimes, etc., they enter the lure permanently. I mean, like as potential victims. I mean, for example, in the famous Zodiac killer case, there's a victim in Riverside,
right,
Cherry Joe Bates, that would have been 2 years before the first known confirmed victim. And once people who were looking at the case linked that case, even though it was quite different than the other murders, it has never left the canon. But people who are really, zodiacologists, as they call themselves, question that case. There's no way to unlink it, and the Riverside police have always thought it was somebody else, and it muddied things too much. So it's like one of the things that really worries me about this, and I'm sure you guys have experienced this for years, that once people have it in their mind that the case is linked to a certain person, it's sort of an indelible mark. And I mean, you could already, I would bet that if we were to look on Wikipedia or something, these have already been listed as potential BTK cases.
I'm
I
sure.
mean, it's so automatic. I don't know yet, but I also wanted to ask you, Catherine, does Rader identify with any infamous killers? Are there any that he sees himself as sort of imitating or having inspired him, other than Glotman that you mentioned?
Well, Glatman and H.H. Holmes were probably the two most important ones. He kind of wanted to be Jack the Ripper in a way, in terms of he got away and was famous forever. He wants that, but he actually identifies more with fictional serial killers in terms of some of the things they thought up to do, then he copied them.
Oh, very interesting. So you mean Holmes that created the torture house in
Yeah, H.H. Holmes, the torture house,
Mudgett,
right?
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So the idea being that people think they're entering a benign house, and some
Well,
lever dumps
he
them.
put this all into barns and silos, the torture implements. In his fantasies, he had a barn or a silo where he had all these torture implements the way he imagined H.H. Holmes had. So
Interesting.
that was a role model.
Well, he mentions also.
Yeah, go ahead, Greg. Please.
I was just going to add to that, Gary. He mentions also in one of his letters to the media, he specifically mentions Harry Glatman, but Jack the Ripper as well. But
Right.
he also talks about the Boston Strangler.
Yes, because he strangled people. Yeah.
Yeah. Pantyhose Strangler of Florida.
Right.
The Hillside Strangler. So it's all
Well,
very
actually, the
consistent with things
pantyhose strangler was Georgia. So you got that wrong.
Yeah, you're going to have to correct him on that. And then Ted of the West Coast.
Yes.
Yeah,
but he really didn't pay that much attention to Bundy, aside from Bundy getting all this publicity. He mostly was interested in killers who did the kinds of things he wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
Is it true what they're saying in the media that he's jealous of Rex Herman as the suspect?
No, he
Was that a
thinks
myth?
he originally made a statement that he's a clone of me because we're both 59 when we were caught. And he made a number of statements. And I said, Dennis, your victimology isn't even close to his. That your similarities are on a very surface basis at best. And then he kind of dropped it.
Mm.
He asked today if there was any news about him, though. I don't think he's jealous. It's just more he finds that fascinating because they both lived double lives. They both had families. They both, were able to fool people for long periods of time. So that's what he really looks at him when he thinks about him.
You need to
These
tell
cases
him,
are
Dr.
interesting.
Ramsland, that.
Oh,
Yeah.
what'd you say, Chris?
No, I'm just making a joke. You need to tell him, yeah, you were on the interview tonight.
Oh.
Just
He
time.
knew that he knows that I was going to be talking about him. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, because at Boston College, M. Burgess, Victor Petreka, and I were studying asphyxiators, and one of the things that's very interesting to us is the question of whether an asphyxiator wears gloves, because of the idea that they may want a fuller sensory experience of strangling a victim without gloves. Do you know if Rader wore gloves?
Oh yeah, he tried all kinds of like dish detergent, those dish gloves, which were awful.
Oh.
He stole some golf gloves because they were nice leather and they worked very well. So he tried a lot of different gloves, but yes, he did use them.
He was wearing bright gloves in the bright case.
Yeah.
Interesting. Did he talk at all about why that method of killing was so particularly thrilling for him?
And the power up close and personal. I think that's something we see in a number of them, but just being able to see their face and see the life leave their eyes. I mean, that's part of it. Some of them
So when
died
you
too
see the-
fast, like Maureen Hedge died too fast. She was a very small woman, and he jumped on top of her and strangled her, and she died much more quickly than he wanted her to.
Interesting. So when the victims are in photographs are turned over, that's a kind of posing that happened after they're strangled. He's looking at them and then he's sort of turning them on the bed or what have you, or is there strangulation from behind?
He strangled, all of them from the front.
Yeah.
He
Well,
hanged Josephine
Yeah.
and, watched her from the front.
So the sort of pose turned over later with the head to the bed or whatever.
Oh, you're talking about Nancy Fox? The
Yes.
Nancy Fox
Mhm.
case. He did strangle her from, I think he did tie her up and strangle her from behind. Also with Catherine Bright, he stabbed her because he was experimenting and hated it. It was too gory. It wasn't fast enough. But yeah, she's one he did from behind, but the others, I believe, were all from the front.
And I think too, in the Bright case, with the stabbing, he stabs her 11 times.
Yeah.
And I think that's obviously overkill. And I think he's losing control over that whole crime scene. And
well, at that point, Kevin had run out of the house, even though
Yeah.
he'd been shot.
Exactly. So he knew he had to kill her quickly,
Yeah.
and get out of there. And that was the quickest way to do it. There was not going to be any satisfaction with the strangulation.
She was still alive though when the police came.
Yeah. I guess she died during surgery.
Yeah.
Well, there's a story that's been told. I don't remember if it was on this podcast or elsewhere about Rader in the home with his family. And one of these moments where the mask fell away and he became BTK in front of the family was that a dish of pasta spilled and the sauce was all over the kitchen floor and he began strangling the son. And I said at the time that I wondered if the sauce reminded him of blood, if it was activating in some way to him, because he so abruptly changed, and by the report, his eyes changed, he became infuriated, and does he have an aversion to the sight of blood?
So we talked about that incident today, in fact, because that's one of the things that's being said about him being abusive to his family. And he said that happened one time only. They did not fight me off. I gained control of myself. And yes, I regret doing that. But he never mentioned that it was red sauce or anything. He just said that it was a moment in his family experience where things weren't going well, and he got enraged. And he would, because he liked order, he liked organization.
Yeah, wasn't he obsessive compulsive?
Very, yeah. Oh, these letters, you guys have gotten these letters where he writes up the side and fills up every single space. Yeah.
Numbers to keep track. Yeah, the letter. Yeah. But doesn't an obsessive compulsive quality suggest that he would be particularly adherent to a ritual and a routine of killings and so forth, so that changing in the dramatic way that would be necessary for some of these other cases to be his also seems out of character for somebody with that quality? I mean, Greg, don't you think that obsessive types of killers seem almost ritualistic and meticulous?
Sure. I mean, that's the way in which they approach it, but then if something happens that they can't control, like the behavior and reaction of the victim, everything goes to hell in a handbasket for them. And so now they're in reactive mode rather than proactive, going along with their plan.
Which would have been the only change, the only reason for the change in the Bright case, for example.
Yeah,
that there was a loss of control.
Yeah.
Right.
So in his case, I mean, with Dennis, he's pretty consistent through his 10. I mean, other than his evolution into his final victims, but he was progressing as he was going on. Right, Doctor?
There were two victims he removed from the house. One was because the FBI profilers had come in, and he wanted to kind of foil their profile. And the other was because the 10th victim, he wanted that fantasy in a barn. And so he intended to take her body to a barn, but he got lost. And so she ended up dumped under a bridge. But that was simply a fulfillment of a fantasy he had yet to do. And but the other one he took out was really about foiling the FBI.
And what was his rationale for posing one of his victims in the church?
That was because he had stolen underwear that he wanted to see how it looked on her, and he wanted to take his time taking pictures in a protected environment.
Mm-hmm. So it really had nothing at all to do with the church or his role at the church, etc.
No, he had the keys to the church. He had put black plastic over the windows to make sure any passing cars couldn't see in. Mm-hmm. It was a place he could go where nobody would be able to interrupt him, really.
It's interesting because that shows the practical aspects of MO, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And going with these other cases that are coming up, that shows you that he likes to commit his crimes in an enclosed environment. I don't think he'd be comfortable to doing it out in a public or more of even if it's rural and somewhat isolated, but exposed, nevertheless, still exposed potentially for somebody to see him.
Yes.
And it puts him in a situation where his risk level is lower by doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it seems like he's very conscientious of that risk level. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
And it's also consistent with in barns and he seems to like the notion of being inside of a space like that. Are there any exceptions that we know of? Any outside of, any victims outside of homes?
The abduction attempt if it had gone through. And there was another one. And the reason I'm the one who actually told him about the Garber case way before any investigators got involved in it. He had thought in one project, it was a woman whose car had broken down. And I think could have been Missouri. And he thought about going and pretending to help her and then abducting her from her car, but 2 other guys came along and so he left. But to have that gone through, or the bank clerk, so that would have been where he was doing a very different kind of approach.
And there was that one approach where he throws the brick through the sliding glass door, right? Is that how he gets?
Yeah, and that was an odd one, but he got cold.
Yeah, exactly.
It was January.
It's practical.
Yeah, that was it. Again, practical. Yep.
Yeah. Interesting.
Very, very interesting.
So I have a question, Dr. Ramsland. What, in your assessment of him through the many, many years, and of course, how often do you have opportunity to communicate with him? I know you did today, but how often are you in communication with him?
We kind of go, well, we were writing letters, but now we can't write very much. Talking once, maybe once every 3 weeks, unless there's some reason we need to talk, then he'll call. He has another friend that I communicate through if I want him to call me. In the past month, I've probably talked to him at least once a week.
So, and with modern technology today, how much access does he have to the communication level?
Well, they have tablets in the prison now, and they're not working very well. He can text people, he can email people, and he does do this with the media. He has a few media people who text him, and he texts them back. But again, the tablets often are not working well, and he doesn't get to have the tablet in his cell. They distribute them on like every other couple of days or whatever it is.
But I always ask this question.
Oh, go ahead, Chris, please. I was asking if it's true he's dying. I mean, this is what it says in the media.
Who said that?
It said in the media that he was a shell, reduced
Oh,
to a shell of himself, that he's withering, that he's on his way, that
he
I was curious how.
has is it scoliosis where your spine?
Hmm.
Yeah, so he's lost a lot of inches off his height.
Mhm.
Doesn't have teeth because dental in prisons is not great.
I see.
But I'm telling you, he sounded robust today. He had a mini stroke. There was a time when he thought maybe a cancer, and that was years ago. But no, he doesn't strike me as he's dying. He's certainly reduced greatly from when he first went to prison, but he sounds even today. He wanted to talk longer, and I said, I have something to do, which was this.
So he,
Fascinating.
Well,
What's his impression of the investigators coming in to talk to him?
Say it again.
What's his impression of the investigators?
Well,
coming
he
in to
has
talk to him?
admitted he's got an attorney, so the attorney asked him to please stop talking to people. He has admitted it's very exciting to him. It's thrilling because he thinks he's in this kind of cat and mouse game, and he's going to win. And it gives him a rush to have them come and talk with him, and yet at the same time he's getting annoyed because he's told his story over and over and over, and they refuse to accept it. They just think he's lying. A particular investigator, and he's just sort of tired of it at this point. He feels like I've told everything, and there is a deal where he did a long interview and he got immunity so that nothing would happen to him. Tell anything and everything, and nothing will happen as a consequence. So he went through all of that, and he just feels like, how much more do I have to do? When will this end?
we know that he was involved in religious activity. So in your conversations, have you ever brought up the topic as to whether or not he has a belief in God or a higher power of some sort?
He evolves regarding that. The earlier person who had started this with him was religious, and so they had Bible studies and whatnot. And he'll do that with really anybody who wants to. But I didn't pursue it with him. I wasn't really wanting to do that particular activity, so he drops it. That's the cubing thing. Okay. So we're not going to do that. So we're going to do this. And
kind of the chameleon
religion with somebody else who comes along. He has said, because of facing potential death, he knows he probably only has a year or two left. He has talked about a belief in God, and then, no, I don't think there's anything. So he goes back and forth. I think like many of us do.
Sure. I would guess he hopes there isn't. No, I would think he hopes there isn't. Yeah.
Right. No, but there was a podcast that was on about this, and I was sort of speaking in the comments, and I said that, just as we had said, that it didn't make any sense that he wouldn't boast about these additional cases if they were his. And the answer that came back was, well, he's afraid of the death penalty. And this doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, I was just curious what your thoughts are on this notion that this is the reason for keeping a secret about it.
Well, I actually talked about that in the book, where maybe, potentially he if there are other victims, he's not going to talk if they happen to be in death penalty states. I had said that in the book. But right now he feels as if, well, so what? It's going to take forever for them to see this through. I'll die well before that happens. But the immunity deal is that there won't be consequences. Now, the problem with any deal of that nature is if they decide he didn't say things that he should have said, then the deal is off, right? But he's still not really that concerned about it. I've also heard people say, oh, he's worried about his soul. I don't think so.
Can I ask a question from the perspective of, for law enforcement's sake? Have you ever had any conversation with him with respect to investigative approaches for people like him, cases like his, for law enforcement? What lessons can law enforcement learn?
I
What would
talk
be your
about
parting
that
shot
too.
on that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because he almost got caught by an officer and he played the Boy Scout card because he was volunteering that weekend of the Dolores Davis murder. And he was in his uniform and he just played that up. And the officer, I guess, bought the idea that, well, if you're volunteering for the Boy Scouts, you couldn't be the person we're looking for. But had that officer searched his car, he would have found evidence that they were looking for. And so that's one of the things I say. Here's very clearly an example of the notion that these serial killers can't be decent people, and that's the facade they use that.
Well, they're chameleons,
They manipulate expectation, and that's exactly what happened in that case. So I do have some tips for law enforcement in the book from the case. I think it's a very instructive case about stereotypes.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, and it's interesting this floating around the internet about the one and the zeros. You know that there's more.
Yeah.
You know, help me understand that.
Okay, so that was okay. I think he said this to Carrie. He wanted to emphasize to her it was 10, and he drew 1 and a 0. And she thought that meant 100.
Oh.
But this is a guy who hasn't got total control over his bodily functions. He's in a wheelchair. 100?
How does he see that, his relationship with his wife and his family today? How is that since this has all blown up here?
Well, has no relationship with his family right now. Carrie has been to see him a few times on behalf of law enforcement. His son has not been there. His wife has never been there and does not have anything to do with him.
Yeah, and I think it's important for our audience as well as the world to obviously keep into mind that they were broadsided as well. I mean, when this whole thing went down, and it's really important that we always make sure that we understand that victims are not only just on the side of the deceased, but there's also the side of the suspect that we have to be sensitive to and pay attention to, that there is that trauma on that side. And Gary, you are obviously an expert in that lane for many, many years. But the fact that he's kind of resurfaced here in some of these hypotheticals where the authorities have come out, and it's being driven somewhat by the authorities, where we've already seen families of Kenny, for an example, come forward and say, enough. If you have evidence, fine. If you don't, enough already. We've already experienced the death of our daughter. And me being a father who has lost a son, who was a 20-year-old son, I get that idea of that from a family's position. And so that's why here, having you on here tonight, Dr. Ramsland, is such a privilege, because not only are you the authority on this guy, but you also get the fact that you can communicate back to him of, look, now or never. And I think you are doing such a service by getting into his psyche for all of these years, not only for law enforcement, but quite frankly, how to continue to keep these individuals where they belong, because they are so dangerous. And that's, I can't thank you enough. And if, folks, if you're just joining with us, you've got to get Dr. Ramsland's book. It's called Confessions of a Serial Killer. And by the way, that's only one of 71 books. So hit that link, and see all of that, all of her books, and really get to understand where she's coming from and why she really is the authority on Dennis Rader. The fact that he is able to call her even tonight and they have a conversation about the way he processes things. So I hope folks really understand where you come from, Doctor,
Thank you.
because you really do come from a position of authenticity and authority. And for that, I'm very grateful that you're here tonight. Dr. Brucato, thoughts on the show? I could talk to Dr. Ramsland for months and still not get enough. It's like, I got to take one of your classes. How about that one of these days?
You can
But
take it on great courses.
Yeah, I know, right? Great. Think about it, right? How long have we been training law enforcement about this guy and just the aspects that we know?
Oh, absolutely.
And
completely
how many
different
hundreds
dimension.
of-
Completely different
Yeah.
dimension for him. It's excellent.
And how many hundreds of guys have we been in front of? And here's just a quick picture of some of the task force where we have talked about Dennis Rader. And here now, he's back, and as Dr. Ramlin said, and we knew he would be reveling in this. But it's important for the public to understand we don't want to give him too much if he doesn't earn it. If it's not his. Because that is really feeding Dennis Rader.
Yeah.
It's not the fact that we are saying, hey, let's take a look at this for the victim's sake on this side. But the last thing we want to do is keep this guy in the press if he hasn't done it. And if you're going to CrimeCon, make sure you sign up to go see Dr. Ramsland and Dr. Brucato. Man, talk about a dynamic duo to where you can meet them in person and shake their hands and get to know them from a different perspective. But so, Dr. Brucato, thoughts on where we're this evening here?
Yeah, and forgive me, there's a couple times my sound is going out, and I'm having trouble telling if somebody's finished with their sentence, or so just forgive me for that.
No problem.
But it sounds like you were asking about general impressions of the, and what I would say is that I have had a very tough time recently seeing all this stuff flying about Raider, because what I felt was that I needed to see an injection of kind of professional, careful, methodical consideration in order to have some sense of what I feel about it. And what I think is that the kind of firsthand information that we're getting from Dr. Ramsland, the excellent kind of investigative insights that you have, this discussion of differences in signature and MO and everything else, collectively do raise some really important doubts and points of doubt that I hope that people who are watching this will take into consideration before leaping to conclusions about this. Just because a person has killed doesn't mean that they've killed everyone under the sun. And what I also feel is that there's something to this, and you see it with the Zodiac case, which I mentioned earlier, because he has that similar quality of taunting and writing letters and all that. That there's this fantasy that seems to come up for people where you're dealing with some kind of mastermind where everything they do has a secret code in it, and it has a double. In the Zodiac case, people say things like, he found a location on a map because it needed to make a certain picture. He knew people's birthdays and was, really bizarre stuff. And what I'm worried about is that in this fantasy of the kind of person that Rader was, where he's almost larger than life as a serial offender, is that people are overreading things like little lines in a drawing, maybe letters that mean something, or etc. And Dr. Ramsland, I think you see some of this too, this incredible overreading of things. And I don't I just don't. I think we have to be extremely careful because it also makes him into almost a cinematic killer that's playing this cat and mouse game, and it titillates people, but it may not have any basis in reality, and it may be giving him too much credit as a mastermind killer. I mean, this is not Ted Kaczynski, that kind of thing. In fact, Dr. Ramsland, what is your sense of his intellect? I mean, is this a superior intellect or a kind of average guy?
Well, I mean, he's somewhat street savvy, but he was a C and D student. He didn't do well. And when we would read some things together because I wanted his sense of it. It took him a long time to get through some of this material. He had to process it. Almost always he made it about him because that's as much as he could really think about. He's certainly not a mastermind.
And there does seem to be this playing up as if he, every little thing has a meaning and is a code.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's a bit much.
And I'll say that he was more lucky than he was skilled at doing this. Really, when you look at all the mistakes he made, he really was lucky.
Right. Well,
That's
that's how I see it, that it's an injection of logic that's been needed.
Yeah. One of the things that we try to end on after a case is to analyze risk factors of the victim, choices, decisions that they may have made that may have innocently and ignorantly contributed to becoming a victim of certain types of crimes. Other things we want to highlight is what can victims do to prevent becoming victims of certain types of crimes. And I'm wondering, from all of your interaction with him and the study of his crimes, what your opinion is. Do you have a message, words of wisdom for people who are watching to help them prevent becoming victims of this type of a crime and that type of an offender?
Well, all of his victims were low-risk victims. I mean, they're in their homes, not doing anything to bring attention to themselves. So that's a hard question to answer. Yeah. But I would say we have to avoid the idea that we have the formula so that we will be able to see someone like this on site. We'll be able to recognize them. And that's something we get from fictional media, and people feel safe, but in fact they're not safe if they don't understand that these killers can defy any of our formulas. The reason I studied Rader was he was an outlier to many of the ideas that came out of the 1990s. We have to be very careful about making assumptions and just being as careful as you can in your personal life. But that being said, none of these victims did something to put themselves in harm's way.
Yeah, I guess the only consideration would be left for people who are watching to imagine themselves in a situation like that and what they might have to do and decide to do for self-protection within that setting. And as personal of a decision as that is, there is no generic counsel to give them. But it's something that's certainly worth considering for our viewers to think about. All right, what if I were in this position? What would I do? Once an individual comes into my home, so there are presumptions that can be made about the intent of that individual and what they're capable of doing, regardless of what they tell you that they're there for to begin with. And what does that suggest and imply? And what might my response be to something like that? Whether it be compliance or whether it be to resist and fight. That's another whole discussion.
Yeah.
But your insights are invaluable. It's been wonderful to talk with you, and thank you so much for the opportunity that you've given us to do that.
You're welcome. I'm pleased to have been here. Thank you for inviting me.
And
absolutely.
And so as
go ahead.
Go ahead, Gary.
No, I was just gonna say I
Um,
have a letter. I have a letter from Dennis that I think I sent it to you once, Catherine, where he lays out tips about how to not be victimized that come from his background as a security person and as a serial killer.
Ah,
And I can't seem to find the image of it, but you may have it in your inbox somewhere from when I emailed it to you, Catherine. But I feel like like to forward it to Greg
please.
because it's pretty fascinating. I
Yeah,
mean,
but
things
even
like how to
so,
grow your hedge, and
he would say the best thing to have done that I could do was present to them a ruse that I was just there. If they did what I said, they'd be fine.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so then what are you going to do with that?
Interesting.
Well, the presumption is anybody that comes into your home with giving you instruction and trying to control you implies that they're capable of doing anything and everything. And so I think, from my perspective, speaking to my own family, if I would be with that in mind, you've got to make the decision at that moment not to allow them to control you and do everything that you can to avoid it.
yeah. Wow. So what a way to level set this entire conversation tonight. And so, Dr. Ramsland, on behalf of the Cold Case Foundation and the interview room, we are so grateful that you chose wisely your time tonight to come spend some educational, intellectual conversation with us, to the point where we're learning most definitely more about him so that we can apply it to other law enforcement agencies. I mean, as Greg and I and Dr. Brucato and many others, hopefully maybe we can get you onto the foundation as one of our experts. We'd love to, have you come in because man, you are just an amazing psychologist. And
thank
and
you. I do trainings for homicide investigators.
Wonderful.
Okay.
So
Well,
Sure,
we would extend an invitation to you to come on board with us as one of our expert advisors
great.
in the Cold Case Foundation.
And I love your
So-
initiative with the Native Americans. I think that's terrific.
Thank you.
Yeah, we could use you. We
You'd be a
really
great
can.
resource. Great resource.
There's a lot of work there. And so our tradition is you have the last word. So I'm going to pull out Dr. Brucato. Thank you so much, as always, Gary, for everything, and for setting this up and helping us out here. We're so grateful. And Greg, again, you looks like you grew a little hair through this. So
A little hair. It's the only place I can grow it.
Always thankful. And so, Dr. Ramsland, you have the last word. I'm going to get out of here with the rest of the team, and we're going to leave this evening for you to tell us whatever you feel on your heart, and then we're going to go to Hawaii. So again, thank you so much for being here. And will you come back?
Sure.
By the way, will you come back?
Sure. I will.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Well, I think the one thing I would want to say is that we're in an environment these days with true crime where innuendo is replacing truth. And I think we have to always keep in mind when we talk about evidence for something, it's something we've tested and we know for sure is evidence and not just potential evidence. We have to be very careful with our words, careful with the impressions we leave, and careful about the narratives that we tell, because it's so easy to slip into believing that we know for certain when we really don't. And that's what I would really want to say is we need to approach. I'm not saying that Dennis Rader is necessarily telling the truth, but I am saying that accusing anyone of something, we really need to back it up. And I'm hoping that we'll see this case resolved one way or another.
Hard working every day, I'm stressed out. 24/7, babe. No timeouts. Wish we could fly away. You and I go to our favorite place. Oh yeah, yeah. Make special memories together. I'll be your company now and forever. I say we fly away. You and me go to our favorite place. Feeling the sun on my face in Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. I need a summer breeze, some fresh air to put my mind at ease. No one cares. You wanna come with me? Me and you go to our favorite tree. Are you ready now? We jump on a plane now. We're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away. Don't hesitate now. We're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away. We'll never come down. We're going away. Yeah, we're going away. You and me. Feeling the sun on my face in a while.